Good evening, everybody. Fantastic to see so many people here offline in this room. And I can't see you, but I'm sure there's a lot of people online as well. Very welcome this evening to the Nobel Memorial Program session on the Literature Awards. My name is Anders Hector. I'm Science and Innovation Counselor at the Embassy of Sweden here in Seoul. And I will be the moderator this evening. Everything we say will be translated between English and Korean, and you can choose online which channel you want to follow, in which language. And online you can also find an opportunity to write questions to the speakers. And in this room, I suggest that you also turn to this facility at the Nobel Memorial Program.kr to write questions. Let me now introduce the host for this evening, the Ambassador of Sweden to the Republic of Korea, His Excellency Daniel Wolvén.
Thank you, Anders, for that kind introduction. And dear guests, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this Nobel Prize Symposium on the Award in Literature, given in 2022, as we all know, to Annie Ernaux for, and I quote, "the courage and clinical acuity with which she uncovers the roots, estrangements, and collective restraints of personal memory," unquote. This symposium is held as part of the Nobel Memorial Program, which the Embassy organizes with the kind support of three leading Swedish universities, KTH Royal Institute of Technology, Lund University, and Umeå University, representatives of which universities are with us here tonight. With these Nobel symposia, we try to do several things. We try to stimulate curiosity about the Nobel Prizes that have been awarded this year. We also try to evoke interest about the Nobel Prize as such in a wider perspective. Tonight, I wish to particularly thank the panelists, our speakers, and of course, the Korea Comparative Literature Association for your steadfast support to this particular session. And of course, Seoul National University, which is kindly hosting us in this beautiful hall. So again, thank you very much. I think all of us here now are very keen to hear the speakers and the panel's insight on this year's Nobel Prize in Literature. Thank you. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. A very important and valued partner to the Embassy in conducting these symposia on literature is the Korea Comparative Literature Association, KCLA. And I'm very happy to welcome to the stage the president of KCLA, Hyun-Jin Lee. Please. Here.
God kväll, välkommen till Korea. I hope my Swedish pronunciation has survived tonight. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and all the delegates from Sweden. Welcome to Korea. 저는 방금 소개받은
So as introduced, I am president of Korea Comparative Literature Association, Hyun-Jin Lee. The Swedish Embassy has jointly organized this 2022 Nobel Prize in Literature Symposium jointly with the Korea Comparative Literature Association. For the past 2 years, this symposium had been only hosted online, and it is a great joy and honor to be hosting you and seeing you face to face tonight. On October 6th, the Swedish Academy of Sciences announced the French writer Annie Ernaux as this year's Nobel Literature Prize laureate. She was awarded for the courage with which she uncovers the roots, estrangements, and collective restraints of personal memory. This is the reason why the Academy chose Erno as this year's winner, and this offers us an opportunity to reflect on the significance and role of literature. Literature, from time to time, shares with readers the stories that have not been documented in history in an extremely private place as well as a place for community. In particular, comparative literature brings the literary narratives from one country across the boundaries of language and space to deliver it as a means for interaction and transforms it into narratives for us all. In that sense, all of us who study foreign literature are also scholars of comparative literature. So tonight, we will share within the realm of literature the narrative strength and courage of Annie Ernaux and translate it into a strength of our own. For organizing this important symposium, I thank His Excellency Daniel Wolven, Swedish Ambassador to the Republic of Korea, and also the special thanks to the delegates who have traveled from Sweden for the symposium, and also everyone who has joined us in person and who is participating online. My sincere thanks to them all. I hope that you will be able to. We will all come together in literature tonight.
Thank you so very much. Tusen Tech.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, President. And we have done these Nobel Memorial Programs. This is the third year that we're doing them, and all the time together with the Swedish universities. They are an important partner to the embassy. It wouldn't be possible without them. And for the first time of these 3 years, we have them physically here in this room, which is fantastic. And I'm very happy to welcome to the stage Katrine Riklund, Professor Katrine Riklund, that is a Pro-Vice Chancellor of Umeå University. Welcome to the stage, Katrine.
So thank you, Mr. Ambassador, distinguished professors, all old and new friends on site and online from South Korea, from Sweden, and from the rest of the globe. I have been thinking this afternoon while I asked a medical professor to introduce the Nobel Prize in Literature, and now I understand why. It's because I'm a researcher in cognitive science. We are working with the healthy and the diseased memory, so that's the connection. It's really a great honor to be a partner of this Nobel Memorial Program 22 on site here in Seoul. And on behalf of all 3 Swedish partner universities, I would like to thank our host, Mr. Daniel Wolven, the Ambassador of Sweden to the Republic of Korea, and all others that have been working very hard to make this symposium to be real. A special thanks to Professor Lee, the president of the Korea Comparative Literature Association, KCLA. As you know, a Nobel Prize is a very special appreciation, and all you that are here in person and online will have an exciting time sharing the presentations and discussions with the distinguished speakers. This afternoon has been kind of a taste of the Nobel Day in Stockholm, December 10. Also, that day is live streamed, so everybody that wish can take part of lectures and the prize ceremony when the laureates receive the prizes from the hand of the Swedish king. In fact, there is a whole week with Nobel activities in Sweden. Today, we have so far shared presentations and discussions of the prizes in medicine or physiology, physics, chemistry, and now finally the Nobel Prize in Literature. We have also heard about the prize in economics, sciences 2022, but now it's time for the prize in literature. Alfred Nobel specified that one of the prizes should go to whoever during the past year have done humanity the greatest good by writing the most excellent ideal direction. Prize winners are appointed, as we heard, by the Swedish Academy and announced in October each year by its permanent secretary in the stock exchange in the Gamla stan, the old city of Stockholm. And this prize has been awarded since 1901. So get curious, and have a learning time. I wish you all a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Wiklund. And we have for you and for us here two fantastic keynote speakers that are going to give presentations and a panelist. So 3 people and me will have a conversation on stage in a while. And I would like to begin with welcoming to the stage Florence Cisask. And Florence Cisask has been the lecturer of French at Umeå University Language Department for over 30 years. She has mostly been teaching French-speaking literature and cultures. Her main research has aimed at rediscovering and revoicing 19th century French female writers. Other research interests of hers lay in autobiographical texts, Francophone writers, and Creole languages and cultures. She has recently translated several Swedish graphical novels and children's books into French that have been published in France. She has been Deputy Director of Studies in French and International Coordinator at the Language Department at Umeå University since 2009. Florence Cisask, please, the stage is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ambassador, good evening, and thank you for having me here. It has been a very enriching experience so far to be in South Korea. We've been hearing about innovation in science, high technology, artificial intelligence, and so forth, and now to something entirely different, artificial intelligence and the art of writing with a pen. That's actually what Annie Ernaux does. Here she is. It is hardly the first time that the Nobel Prize in Literature is awarded a French writer. It is in fact the 15th time. The first prize ever awarded, 1901, as you were recalling, was actually given to a French writer, Sully Prudhomme, that I'm afraid not many people remember, neither do I. It was a long time ago. So 15 out of 117 is quite an outstanding number, but most French recipients received their prize a long time ago, at a moment in time where France might have had another kind of cultural aura than today. All of the other 14 were men. So the novelty this year is that for the first time ever, the French laureate is a woman, Annie Ernaux. As a matter of fact, as many French writers have been given the prize as women writers of all countries and categories. So the prize, one could say, has only recently been feminized. Concerned by women's rights as she is, this is something that Annie Ernaux, no doubt, might want to address in her speech when coming to Stockholm to receive the prize. We shall see. Sorry. So what has Annie Ernaux to tell us? Is she in any way innovating in the field or even trend-setting? I should say yes, if you consider how many young writers of today, like Édouard Louis or Nina Bouraoui, name her as an inspiration. But let's have a look at the motivation that was given to the award by the Swedish Academy. I might want to warn you that I'm not entirely satisfied by the English translation provided by the Academy and might have to alter it slightly in order to make it correspond better to the Swedish original, which I think was much better. So here it is. The Nobel Prize in Literature is awarded to the French author Annie Ernaux for the courage and clinical acuity with which she uncovers the roots, estrangements, and collective restraints of personal memory. And what I'm proposing to do now is simply to take you through each and every one of those carefully chosen terms and try to illustrate them. The roots of personal memory. Annie Ernaux was born and raised in Normandy, northern France. She wasn't actually born in Yvetot, as I wrote here, but she was raised in Yvetot, and she was born in 1940. Her parents, as many French people at the time, came from a rural background and never got a chance to study through school, let alone go to the university. To avoid working in a factory, they purchased and ran a small grocery store, and that was also a cafe. There were not many books around. In her book about her father, A Man's Place, La Place, Ernaux recalls how he took her to the library for the first time when she was 12, and they were taken aback by the fact that you were actually expected to know what kind of books you wanted to borrow. They never went back, not together at least. But the young Annie never lost interest, as we know. She studied literature and philosophy, and by the age of 22, she had written her first book that was never actually published. She married one of her fellow students, they got children, and it wasn't until the age of 32 that she eventually got published. Her first book is called Les Armoires Vides, Cleaned Out in English. She started teaching, and she eventually became a professor in literature. Ernaux is now 82 years old, and unlike many of her fellow laureates, she has long been a celebrated writer, long before the Nobel Prize. The fact that she was the only one in her family engaged in university studies made her parents proud, but at the same time created a social and cultural gap between her and her father, above all. Her marrying a bourgeois, as she says, or a middle-class man, pushed her even further away from her modest origins. And this is basically the subject of many of her books, that are all without exception based on personal experience and personal memories. Thereof, the roots of personal memory. She tells us how it felt to be a girl, a woman, a mother at a certain moment in time in a certain society, the French society. Among her experiences as a woman, her getting an abortion at a time when it was illegal in France is certainly one of her strongest testimonies in happening, l'événement, as she spares us no gory detail. Her class defecting, as she herself refers it to, her class defecting is also a recurrent theme, and the shame that goes with it. It's a double shame. The shame of not having been born with a cultural capital, as sociologist Bourdieu, whom she often refers to in interviews, would say. And the shame of having escaped her own origins and having transferred to a higher social class, which meant that she left behind parts of her origins and her own father, which she recalls in A Man's Place. That she somehow had to sacrifice them in so doing, or at least that's what it felt like. Now, one has to bear in mind that the problematics of class and literature in Sweden and France are quite different. Whereas the folkhögskolor, I found a translation in English, resident colleges for adult education in Sweden, have made it possible for writers with a working class background to emerge and take a natural position in Swedish literature, like Ivalu Johansson or Moa Martinsson. There is no such thing as a working class literature in France. Literature is made by an intellectual elite that Annie Ernaux somehow wanted to belong to. And maybe the Swedish situation in that respect made it especially important for the Academy to reward Annie Ernaux of all writers. So that was the first thing. The estrangements or strangeness of personal memory. I suppose this has to do with how memory actually works, how it mixes up and singles out and transforms, and also the literary processes. How do you account for memory in literature? How do you account for remembering? Writing is strange, as Marguerite Duras a fellow writer would say. And that's actually a title of one of her books. But let's have a look at a quote that Annie Ernaux explains herself what she means with the strangeness of personal memory. And it's an excerpt from The Years, Les Années, which is one of her most popular book and most read. They will all vanish at the same time, like the millions of images that lay behind the foreheads of the grandparents, dead for half a century, and of the parents, also dead. Images in which we appeared as a little girl in the midst of beings who died before we were born, just as in our own memories, our small children are there next to our parents and schoolmates. And one day will appear in our children's memories among their grandchildren and people not yet born. Like sexual desire, memory never stops. It pairs the dead with the living, the real with the imaginary beings, dreams with history. And that is the confusion of memory that she wants to somehow illustrate in her books. Another thing I want to draw your attention to is that she refers to herself as we, which is quite interesting. We'll get back to her style. That was the second thing. Also, she often says that people ask her, how do you choose your subject matters? And she answers, I don't choose them, they choose me. So sooner or later, she knows that she will have to tell the tale. And some tales she doesn't want to tell. Not every experience is possible to tell. As for instance, telling about her children, her grown-up children. She is very reluctant to write anything about them. It was okay when they were kids, but not now. Now, the collective memory, even though Ernaux's main fields of interest, as I've said, have to do with her own experiences, she refuses to call her books autobiographical, preferring the neologism auto-socio-biographical. She sees herself as a sociologist, and the only reason why she goes through with any particular book is because she finds in the story a universal relevance. That's why she seldom says I. There is not much first-person narrative in her books. Even though she refers to herself and people she has actually known, and that she is, so to speak, based on a true story, as the Swedish writer Kristina Lung would have said. What interests her is to tell tales from given parameters that will be helpful or recognizable to as many people as possible. I suppose you could call it identification. She also says, I'm penetrated by others like a whore, which is quite a strong statement. And she explains further in Happening, this book that she wrote about an abortion that she had in the 70s. Maybe the true purpose of my life is for my body, my sensations, and my thoughts to become writing. In other words, something intelligible and universal, causing my existence to merge into the lives and heads of other people. What of the literary qualities of her work? And covering with clinical acuity was what was mentioned in the motivation. After all, even though she claims to want to work as a sociologist, she's not a sociologist, she's not a trained sociologist, nor is she a journalist. She's a novelist, which is quite different. And that is a subject of some controversy, her style. She herself describes it as flat writing, as impersonal as she can possibly make it. Flat writing, she said, in A Man's Place. No sentimentality, no drama has any place in Annie Ernaux's books. So I thought that the clinical acuity was quite prevalent in her books. There is something aseptic about her style, which might not be everybody's cup of tea, but it's certainly very conscious on her part. As she is, as she says, writing from reality. One could say that she is participating in this new genre that was created in the 60s, the autofiction genre. Yeah, I want to go back, sorry. And what of our reality today? That might have to do with the word courage. She just came out with a new book, Le Jeune Homme, which is about a relationship she had with a 30-year younger man when she was in her 50s. As for happening, this is, of course, a controversial subject. Does society allow this kind of relationship? Was it ready for it then? Is it ready for it now? This is what this not so politically correct female writer chooses to explore. And speaking of politics, I said earlier that the Academy's choice was not political. What I meant was, of course, that they might have chosen a Ukrainian writer, for instance, which might have been a more political choice. This is not to say that Ernaux's books are not political per se. They are, of course, political. Feminists have taught us that the personal is political, and that in that sense, Ernaux is definitely political in her books. Apart from that, she's also an activist in her own right. And she said recently in an interview in the big Swedish paper, DN, that she would fight for women's rights till the day she dies. She also fights for equality for all and the means to achieve it. And of course, she's very critical of education in France and the school system in France that she thinks is very unequal. And she fights, as you can see on the picture here, together with Jean-Luc Mélenchon, founder of the French political party La France Insoumise, France Unbowed, against expensive living costs and climate idleness. That's what the sign says here. You can't actually see it, but you have to take my word for it. So you could say that despite her admirable age, I should think that we haven't heard the last of her. And I just wanted to give you the books that she's written, some of the books, a selection of the books that have come in English. Some of the books have been translated twice in English, once in a British translation, another time in an American translation. And they might change names or titles. And some of them I have quoted here. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very interesting and fascinating. And I would like to introduce then our second keynote speaker, which is Assistant Professor Chorong Kang. She's Assistant Professor at the Department of French Language and Literature here at the Seoul National University, which is where we are. Chorong Kang is Assistant Professor at the Department of French Language and Literature. She earned her doctorate degree from Paris University in 2010 with a thesis on Simone de Beauvoir. Her research focuses on French existentialism and women's writing in French literature, and her publications include several writings on Annie Ernaux. You are most welcome, Professor Sohok Lee. Welcome.
네, 안녕하십니까. 저는 서울대학교에서
Good evening.
I'm Cho Dong-gang. I'm working and teaching students at Seoul National University. I would like to first of all welcome everyone to the symposium on behalf of Seoul National University. And also I would like to thank the Korean Comparative Literature Association and also the Swedish Embassy and also the many staff for inviting me and for all your hard work in making this such a successful event. So on the one hand, I'm quite nervous in standing before you here today, as has been noted by the moderator. With regards to Erno, I do have several papers written. However, I have majored in Simone de Beauvoir. Just because of these very few papers, I'm standing here today before you, so I do feel rather nervous. But in the case of Erno, she's not a well-known author in Korea, so if I misrepresent her in any way, I'm afraid that I might cause misunderstandings about this author. However, as a researcher, I will bear that responsibility, and so I hope that my introduction today will help you discover this wonderful author. So today, I would like to talk about the transgressive writing of Annie Ernaux. So what should I do now? Yes. How do I go on to the next slide? 네, 초록.
The big green one.
So, this is the order of my presentation. So, in the Korean Research Society of French Literature, how Ernaux is perceived will be introduced to you. And then I will look at the key characteristics of Ernaux's writing as I viewed. However, Dr. Shisa has already gone over this issue, and I will be adding my own input to this issue. So, basically, in the Korean Research Society of French literature, there is a myth about grand écrivain. So that means a great writer in English. And in Korean, it is also translated as a great writer. So great writer in this sense is a writer who has written works that allows for very expansive research, especially when students go on to a master's program. What they hear from their teachers is that you need to be able to write about a writer who merits a PhD thesis. So you have to select great writers. So in this kind of advice, I was able to discover the elitist and very sexist prejudices that is contained within the Korea Research Society of French Literature, especially in the Korean Research Society of French Literature. When it comes to teaching legitimate French literature, those who have been born in mainland France, those who write elitist work, and the male writers, their works form the mainstream of the curriculum of the French literature that is taught in Korean. So, for instance, Francophone African literature or women's literature, or those writers who do not write in the elitist fashion, their works are excluded from the educational curriculum, or they're treated as supplementary material. That is the reality of Korea. I believe Ernaux is a writer who has been sacrificed because of such views in the Korean literary scene. But I would like to make sure that there is no misunderstanding. This kind of prejudice within the Korean literary scene, the fundamental reasons, causes of this, does not lie in the Korean Research Society of French Literature. In France, as well as other countries, elitist views are held in order to establish the benchmarks for the literary canon, especially within France. This kind of prejudice is much more strong. they have this long-held tradition that upholds such views and presumptions. And so from the view of outsiders, for those outside researchers who are approaching French literature, it's very difficult to oppose such views that are held in mainland France. Despite this, however, Ernaud is a victim of such views. So what kind of characteristics of Ernaud's writings makes her such a victim of these prejudice? I think these characteristics can be summarized into the following two. First, as has been noted by Dr. Tisak, Ernaud, the previous presenter noted, said, I was penetrated by people as a whole. And I think this expression embodies the situation. Ernaud's writings are based on the sexual experience that she has herself experienced, and that is a key material for her. But within the Korean and French literary circles, sexual experience is seen as stereotypical subject material that is favored by female writers. Of course, feminist writing, this concept, or the feminism, these French feminism, the American-born French feminism-based literary criticism was once popular in Korea, starting from the end of the 1990s up until the mid-2000s. Within Korea, the woman's experience attempts to reproduce such experience literally within the framework of women's liberation movement. It had been positively viewed at one point, but after the mid-2000s, there's a feminism or feminist writing. It's too vague. Voices condemning such writing, critical of such writing emerged, and feminist writing deals only with very trivial, women's issues. These voices gained traction, and so the women's writers' work became undervalued. And as a result, the sexual experience of women, the attempt to reproduce in a literary manner, was treated as a very trivial, trite subject matter that is only favored by female writers. And so it was in this context that Ernaud's choice of her sexual experience as her subject material made her a writer who wrote only light literature. And people only focus on the fact that she used her own sexual experience as a subject matter. And so they did not do enough research on her writing and her style of writing. And so up until the moment that Ernaud won a Nobel Prize, Ernaud was simply regarded as just one of those typical French woman writer. And I think the stylistic characteristic of her writing was also one of the reasons. As Dr. Tisak noted, her private experience was very often used as a subject matter. So she is a writer who represents writing of the self. And the writing styles, as her sentences are characterized as a flat writing. This kind of flat writing means that very concise and plain language is used, and the length of her writing is not that long either. Because of these stylistic characteristics, metaphysical themes, these weighty literature, readers who prefer such literature, and the glamorous sentences and the showy sentences, those readers who prefer these kind of styles tend to regard Ernaud's works as light literature. And then this is one of the other reasons that lead to a negative perception about Ernaud's writings. So the French literary scene in Korea had considered Ernaud as one of the stereotypical female writer and producer of light literature. Is this true? Well, of course it's not, and I will show you why from now on. So basically, Among the characteristics of Ernaux's works, what I place greatest importance on is the fact that she is the writer who has pioneered this genre called autosocial biography. Journals or letters, the writing of the self. Ernaux is a writer who has experimented with various variants of this kind of writing. Person's private experience has been dealt with by many writers. However, in the case of Ernaux, she does something different. She combines the private with what is social. And so at the root of such variation is a unique perception of herself. For herself, Ernaux, for herself, self is the super self. So the private and the social and the collective, it is all combined together to form the self. So that is the trans person that she talks about. So the writing of the self is the writing of this trans person. So writing of the self does not write just about the private experiences. While revealing her personal experiences, she endlessly tries to connect this with others' experiences. And what's more, her family and the society in which the family finds itself, the universal structures and mechanisms of that society is examined by the writer. And and the outcome of her efforts is the new genre called autosocial biography. So, self said that a self is not completely disconnected with the others. I consider myself a sum of experience, of determinations too, social, historical, sexual, of languages, and continually in dialogue with the world. And so the intimate is still and always social, because a pure self where others, laws, history would not be present is inconceivable. And so what is intimate is still and always social. This is her own statement. And what's more, for Ernaux, more fundamental essence of herself, she said that the social part of herself outweighs her private aspects. And so she uses herself in order to explore the society, the collective experience. So that is what her writing is about. So the writing about the self, it's quite different from those writings in the tradition of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who wrote Confessions. So it goes beyond these boundaries of the modern biographies or autobiographies. So in that respect, so I'm going to quote this, a very long statement. In 1983, Annie Ernaux wrote this work called La Place to mourn her dead father. This was a very interesting quote from that work. It is in the way people sit and get bored in the waiting rooms, calling out to their children and say goodbye on the station platforms, that I looked for the figure of my father. I have found in anonymous beings encountered anywhere, unknowingly bearing signs of strength or humiliation, the forgotten reality of his condition. So the father here does not refer to her biological father only here. Father refers to the very world of origin that Ernaux herself once belonged to. And so from the others, Ernaux seeking the reflection of her father, and from the others trying to look for the experiences of her father, is identical to herself seeking her own experiences. And so the trans person self as a trans person and writing of the self. I think her characteristics, her writing style is very well revealed in these kind of statements. The second characteristic is writing like a blade. As I have noted previously, the flat writing as well is a part of a style that falls under this category. So basically, Ernaud is a writer that tries to explore the collective experience, and among the collective experience, she focused on the experience of those who were marginalized and alienated. So in that respect, Ernaud tries to cut out the taboos and tries to reveal the hidden realities that had been concealed. And she calls this kind of writing style writing like a blade. More specifically, this writing like a blade is, first of all, about distancing oneself from the subject matter of the writing. It is objectively feeling and observing the subject matter, and then the truth of that subject matter is revealed through the most appropriate language and expressions to give it a shape and form. And so this writing like a blade is basically very different from an elitist writing style, because from her perspective, the true literature, genuine literature, are the so-called true literature or elitist literature cannot contain the experience of everyone. She thought that it was a very small container. The so-called true literature used the language of the elite, and the exclusive nature of this elitist language was what made this kind of literature so narrow in its scope. And so, very intentionally, Ernaud chose a language from a world that was very distant from the world where the elite, the ruling class, belonged to. And writing like a blade used such a language. And this flat writing style is a representative example of writing like a blade. So in that respect, let me read the following sentences. So here, the place. In the course of thinking about writing this work called Place, she expresses the sense of mission she feels as a writer. What matters to me is to find the words with which I thought of myself and the world around me, to say what was for me the normal and the inadmissible, the unthinkable even, bringing to light the languages that constituted me, the words of religion, those of my parents, linked to gestures and things, those of novels that I read in novels. So this is the language of the working class. What is interesting is from the point of view of the mainstream society, this was not a language appropriate for literature, and so it was inadmissible. It was even unthinkable. But on the other hand, this language to Ernaud was seen as a normal language. And so with regards to the so-called literary language or the elitist language, Ernaud was very critical, as is witnessed by these statements. If you ask me what was the most important uniqueness of Ernaud, I would say that it is not the subject matter that she used in her literature, but that she has discovered the most precise and suitable language to express her subject matters. I think that it is her greatest uniqueness, and that representative characteristic is writing like a blade. And inevitably, that kind of writing style cannot help but try to reveal the taboos of this society. And it is in this respect that she uses sexuality as a favorite subject matter. For Arnaud, sexuality does not refer simply to physical sex alone. For her, sexuality as an act is quite symbolic, and the symbolism of such sexuality is the most well described in the usage of photography. Lac Marine was a photographer with which she had a love affair, and before she had a sexual intercourse or after sexual intercourse, the traces of these acts were photographed, and this was made into a book. So in this work, Arnaud writes very honestly about her experiences, and so in some sense it is quite pornographic. But if you regard this simply as a pornographic writing, then you would not be fully understanding and grasping the meaning of her writing. And she equates sexuality with the work of writing. So here in this work, Arnaud says that take off your clothes to have sexual intercourse is the same as shaking off your facade for two beings to encounter each other in their true form. So in this sense, a sexual act is an act through which two people who have their own respective secrets would shake off their outer cover and meet and encounter each other in a very proactive and honest manner. And so in this work, Arnaud says that writing is like an erotic practice. So let me read this sentence. The thought that he began to write on these photos, the signs of a night, fills me with a feeling unknown until now, with an excitement as much intellectual as physical. It's a secret that we share, a kind of new erotic practice. It seems to me that we can do nothing better together than this. An act both united and disjointed of writing. Sometimes it scares me too. Opening up your writing space is more violent than opening up your sex. What an unconscious strategy, perhaps already at work, to not make room for it. Make words and sentences unshakable, paragraphs unmovable. So here, Arnaud equates writing with opening up oneself to the other. So that is the reason why writing brings great fear as well. So for Arnaud, writing is an act that leads her to overcome this fear to truly encounter others. And so from this respect, Arnaud's writing is something that helps her overcome all the barriers that block us from true communication with others. As a conclusion, in 2009, Whitney Regis' quote will be read to you, and I will conclude. A characteristic of her text, the questioning of borders, whether between me and others, between genders, social classes, cultural codes, between public and private dimensions. With this, I'd like to end my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I invite you to have a seat here. And Professor Sisas, please come and sit next to me here. And I would also like to invite our panelist, Professor Woo-Sung Kang. Please come to the stage and take the free chair. Not this one. Professor Kang is a professor at English and Comparative Literature at Seoul National University. His research areas includes American literature and culture, politics of aesthetics, critical theories, psychoanalysis, film theory, and Asian cinema, and is a prolific producer of writing. Very welcome. This was fantastically interesting, and there's a lot to process in listening to these presentations. And let me start with you, Professor Kang. I'm curious about the relation between autobiographical writing and shame and humiliation. In the descriptions, there is many times coming back to the issue of shame and humiliation, as Annie Ernaux is being described in what she's writing, and also how she's describing her father. I would like to hear your views on that.
Yeah, that's very difficult question. 제 생각에는
I believe that in Annie Ernaux's work, the key defining writing style would be autobiographical writing. And Professor Kang Chorong was referring to it as auto-socio-biography writing. So a private story would also encompass the stories and narratives of the society. And from that perspective, autobiographical writing would have the two following effects. One would be, as was mentioned in the presentation just now, the representative feature of the establishment writing, the sexist, masculine, traditional writing. So she'd like to transgress and replace and subvert that kind of established writing. So that's why she was trying to pursue socio-autobiographical writing. And so the subversive effect was what Annie Ernaux was aiming for. And at the same time, in Annie Ernaux's writing, one consistent theme is the revealing and exposing of the societal self, or exposing herself to the outer world. So these are a means of communication. These are ways of communication. But as a woman writer who is within a societal system which poses many difficulties, as a woman writer with the weaknesses or vulnerabilities who has to overcome such constraints in society, she shows her position through the means of shame and humiliation. So exposing oneself through shame is a way of communicating oneself, but at the same time, by exposing the shame and humiliation, is actually resisting against humiliation and shame. So this is a resistance. This is a gesture of resisting against the humiliation which is imposed upon the writer. So Annie Ernaux was from the working class, and she feels shame that she have moved into the bourgeois class. And she also is ashamed of her parents' humble background. So this humiliation and this shame is imposed upon her, but she resists against it. And at the same time, she resists being identified with this shame. So that's how I see it.
So it's a social shame, much more than a personal shame, or a shame as a human being can feel for things, and it's related to her parents because they seemed to be fairly well off, or at least they were described as bourgeois. They had a cafe. They didn't seem to be poor. They weren't living on dirt floor. So
Not anymore, but I wouldn't
Not
say
anymore,
they
but
were bourgeois. I don't think that Annie Ernaux would describe them as bourgeois.
No.
They are not bourgeois.
No.
not bourgeois.
Not in the
Okay.
French
Never.
style.
No?
No.
Okay, that's interesting. So it was there history then that was a source of shame to her that she was unhappy with, and that she inherited them, I guess. Oh, okay. She seems an acute sociological observer, and myself, having a sociological background, I'm trying to understand how good of a sociologist is she. But it seems rather that she is informing sociology rather than the other way around. Would you agree? Starting with you.
I don't know if she would be considered an informative sociologist, but she certainly wants to act as a sociologist. And I remember this book, Journal du Dehors, where she basically describes what she sees when she's going to work. She works in Paris, and she has her house in Cergy in the Ville Nouvelle, as she calls it, the new town, the suburbs of Paris, and she watches people in the subway, and she describes what they're doing very acutely and very in many details. So, and that's her way of saying. And she doesn't take part in anything. She's just an observer. She describes what she sees. So that's what she wants to do, I think. So.
사실상 그 에르노의
So, Erno's, a connection with sociology. There's a lot of research done on that. Her death, Laplace was written to mourn her father's death, and then the woman's story, which was written to mourn her mother's death. Pierre Bourdieu, the French sociologist, the habitus, his theory was applied in this work. Pierre Bourdieu's sociologist theory and intertextuality is recognized. And in Korea, a professor, Oona of Yonsei University, has looked at Brunei habitus-like characteristics that was found in a woman's story and a man's plays. So in that respect, Erno was indeed a sociologist-like. And another reason why I came to like Erno was because Simone Beauvoir appears very frequently in her works. So the second sex of woman, so woman's reality, was heavily critical by this author. And so Erno is very clearly does have characteristics as a sociologist.
And I think that one of Bourdieu's most famous book, La Reproduction, is very much about what she's trying to describe too, that there's this French society which reproduces sort of behaviors, and if you're born in a humble family, there's very few chances that you'll ever end up being a literary writer, or let alone a professor, or because it doesn't happen. This class society is described, and you just reproduce what you've been born with. And so, yeah, I think that she's very much inspired by Bourdieu. Yeah.
Would you say would you say that she tries and generalize her findings and observations to the human condition or something like that? Or is that not important to her? It's rather her observations are her observations, she's writing about it, and we as readers find generalizable relevance in it.
Yes, I think that she's often said that what she likes the most is to read about readers' letters that they write, that they recognize themselves in her books, and that makes her really happy because it's very important for her, the universality of her experience. If people recognize themselves, then she's written something right. Yeah.
특히 아까 말씀드렸던
So what I had noted before, the flat writing like a blade, also falls into this category. So I'm sorry, I'm being so distractive. So the biggest characteristic of flat writing is putting on hold any subjective judgment. And so the question asked by the moderator, is she trying to generalize her observations? No, that's not what she's trying to do. Flat writing is not trying to generalize anything. It's trying to reveal things. And so to the readers, what she had discovered, the reality that she had discovered is revealed to the readers, and for that revealed realities, the readers, their own reality is encouraged to be projected into this reality. So while reading her works, although she belongs to a completely different culture, more than any other French literature that I have ever read, it was so close to reality that I myself had discovered. For instance, can I give a long answer? Is that okay? So my most favorite work and the most well translated work in Korea is A Woman's Story, which was translated by Jung Hae-young. So the flat writing, really trying to keep this writing style intact in the translation is very difficult. So I'm not in a position to evaluate the translations done by translators. However, the typical error that a translator can make is the brown jumper of my father, the cracked shoes, she doesn't write in sentences, but the translation is in sentences, and it removes any kind of deep resonance that can be imbued in that. But in the case of this translation, it really keeps these flat writing style intact. In The Woman's Story, there's a scene where the mother is passing away. Her mother is suffering from Alzheimer, and she's sent to a nursing home. And just before she passes away, Erno is able to see the genitals of her mother. There is no hair, and it was like the genitals of a baby. And I was reminded of my own memory of having seen the genitals of my grandmother just before she passed away, and the conflictual emotions that she felt for her mother. She hated her, she loved her, she blamed her for so many things, but she was sorry as well at the same time. And she didn't, pass any judgments, but she just revealed these objective things. But very deep feelings were evoked from that very flat style of writing. So she's not generalizing anything. She's simply revealing. And so each individual reader is able to, discover different feelings and different emotions from her writing.
Very interesting. And it's, I had another question about the truth, ambitions to be truthful, or questioning, also questioning observations. To what extent she is questioning. She seems to be questioning her own interpretations of things. But if she's writing always very subjective about subjective experience, maybe the truth issue is not an issue. Is that a reasonable question to ask, even? Yeah, I mean,
problem of truth.
it's a matter of perceptions. We see things and we perceive things, and sometimes we misunderstand things, and there may be room for doubt about how to understand some things. But I get the impression that, okay, maybe that's not. Okay, I got a reader. Where is she in the tradition of autobiographical writers? I mean, the last years, I think you mentioned, Dr. Sisak, that she's a trendsetter. Young writers are mentioning her and referring to her. And I read somewhere that there would be no Knausgård without Annie Ernaux. And not everybody here may know who Knausgård is, but it's a Norwegian-Swedish autobiographical writer that has received a lot of attention. And there are quite a lot of such autobiographical writers that are very explicit in what they're writing. They're very they don't hide anything. They don't hide their shames or shortcomings or ugliness or things like that. But she seems set apart. Is she set apart because she was early in doing that, or is it her focus not only on the individual but also on the social that makes her different? How is she set apart from Knausgård and Bukowski and Kafka and other autobiographical writers?
I don't know if Knausgård recognizes her influence. I haven't read about that. But Bukowski, she's very different from Bukowski. To start with, is a man, and he says I all the time. I mean, she has a different ambition. So I don't really know. But certainly, as I said, upcoming writers, a young French-speaking writers are recognizing themselves in and wanting to recognize her influence. As I said, Nina Bouraoui, for instance.
저도 사실 뭐
Well, how influential Erno is among young writers, I'm not in a position to say anything about that. I don't have any specific knowledge on that front. What is clear, however, is that in the field of autobiography, what kind of position that Erno takes, if the question is that, well, then in this field of female writers, women writers, they have been in the field for a very long time. However, these women's writers, they were only recognized for their presence in the field starting from the later half of 20th century. Their writing was recognized as a full-blown literature only in the 20th century later half. So that means these sexist prejudices are very much in effect at play. The very first work of Erno is the Cleaned Out. And this story is about abortion and a narrative about abortion, this very intimate and shameful story. She already starting from her very first work was not something that stopped at being just intimate. So you can see that the very roots of her combining the social and the private could be found in her very first work.
Professor Kang?
저는 아니 에르노
So, in Annie Ernaux's writing, I actually haven't read a lot of her work, but in terms of autobiographical writing, the traditions that existed before Annie Ernaux and also traditions of autobiographical writing from other countries are quite different from Annie Ernaux's writing. For example, in the US, there are writers who consistently write narratives on their own stories and raise questions. Jamaica Kincaid is one of the authors, one of the African-American women writers who is also a professor of English literature, and she is also has been a candidate for the Nobel Literature Prize. But unlike Ernaux, Jamaica Kincaid deals with the racial issues that are deep-rooted in American society. She raises questions on that, and she also compounds it with the living one's life as a woman. But the narrative might feel very flat. And in terms of depth and complexity, it's very difficult to find that kind of complexity in the narrative. But still, there is the very compelling writing and very influential writing. And we are seeing these examples of writing from women writers. Jamaica Kincaid would be one of the examples that could be compared to Annie Ernaux in that regard. And from what I've read about the work of Annie Ernaux, from what I have read of Annie Ernaux, is about revealing one's own wounds. And it was mentioned earlier that there seems to be some sort of resistance to being hurt. And to refer to psychoanalysis, the writer flat out refuses to turn her traumatic experiences into a narrative. So there might have been some unfortunate experiences in her past. But she refuses to have it written as a narrative of the victim. And I believe that even though Annie Ernaux writes about family narratives, she makes a very clear effort to break free of the Oedipus framework, and she is trying to approach the family narrative from a different perspective.
She also is political. She seems to say that she is political. Is the way she is political? Is it an effect of her experiences, would you say, and observations, or is it a choice? Can you see a choice in the political? Can you see political choices that she's making in her writing, or is it only that she draws consequences of her situation and what she sees around her, and that becomes political?
Is there a difference?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question.
But I wanted to come back to this idea of you were talking about Jamaica Kincaid
Yeah.
and race, and that, but she does refer to her work as wanting to defend her race. That's the word that she actually uses. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
An interesting comparison. So yes, what she was exposed to was political, and she makes political choices to talk about it and analyze it and want to make it clear for everybody what's happening in schools and this reproduction and she wants everybody to understand that something needs to be done, I think. Yes.
Not just observing, but also wanting some action.
Yeah, well, you've seen her on the streets. She takes to the streets to actually change things. Yeah.
That's interesting. How was she received here in Korea when the news came that she was the choice of the committee? She is already translated. Several books is translated to Korean, right?
사실 이 문제에 대해서는
Well,
한국의 언론을 그리 긍정적으로
So I don't view the Korean media in a positive light, so don't expect a positive answer from me about that. But when the news of her winning the Nobel Prize came out, I received so many phone calls from reporters, and at night I made several comments. They just simply wrote it down automatically, and they wrote, news reports based on those comments. However, a reporter from Gyeongyang Daily, that reporter actually looked through all the papers that were written about her now, and that reporter wrote a very good article about her. There was a news report that was highly problematic that was written by Joseon Daily. What was problematic about this article was that he took a lot of time to write the article. He actually read the work of Ernaux. I commend him on that. But the simple passion, her love affair with a younger man who worked in a Russian embassy, he simply looked at it as a sexual relationship, and only very erotic and voyeurs, statements were written in that report. Very erotic, sensational sentences filled his media report. But, he concludes by saying that, a very unique writing style. However, the simple passion, that book is a best-selling. It is a best-selling book in the Korean bookstore. So this is the Korean reaction to that news. That is my personal view.
She's selling for the wrong reasons.
물론 그러니까
Well, yes, the general public reading, they're rediscovering Annie Ernaux. I believe that is so because her rankings in the bestseller lists are changing. A woman's story and the man's place these stories that don't focus on sexual experience are now coming up the ranks. But anyway, in the beginning, most of the spotlight was on the sexual experience story, and that was what the journalists had focused on. But the wise readers are now looking at different aspects of her work.
Yeah. The public attention to something serious in, I don't know, than simple passion or scandalizing events.
But I guess you appreciate her, so you think she deserves a bigger audience, perhaps, than she had before. So I'm sure it seems there are mixed feelings about her getting the award. On the one hand, it's the media is giving attention not to the more interesting things, but to the wrong things. But so, do you think it would be better if she was left alone by the Nobel Committee and never received the award?
For me?
Both of you. Any?
I'm not sure about that.
Not sure?
Well, she was certainly happy, but she said it was a responsibility. Yeah, so no, I think she deserved it.
저도 당연히 그렇다고 생각합니다.
I agree that she deserves it as well.
But another candidate, Michelle Were, the other candidate, if she had received it, it would have created quite a sensation, just like when Bob Dylan had received the prize.
Is there a comment to be made about the Nobel Award in that respect? I mean, is it possible to compete in literature? It's not about competing, of course. It's about rewarding amazing things and about making choices among many amazing things. So do you think you may be biased, particularly you, since you're the expert on this and have worked very much with her, but is it a good choice for the committee?
물론이죠.
Yes, I think it was an excellent choice. It was the best choice that could have been made. And the Nobel Literature Prize Committee, among the options that they had, I think it was the best choice that they could make. I'm sorry for this cynical response. But on the other hand, with regards to this prize, talking about whether an author deserved the prize or not is not a desirable topic for us to discuss. So I think the Nobel Prize causing more attention to be paid to her. No, that is positive. I hope she is remembered only as a Nobel Prize winner from now on. That is because, frankly speaking, from the staff of this embassy, I was quite rude. I rejected one of her proposal. From the embassy, they said that one of the media wanted to, have an interview with me, and the reason I rejected this interview offer was because the question that was going to be asked was, "What should a Korean author do to win a Nobel Literature Prize?" And I don't think that kind of questioning is quite desirable and proper. And so I rejected this, proposal from the embassy. And so, this institution of awarding prizes, I have both positive and negative views. Sorry for being so rude.
No, I don't think anyone perceived you to be rude. But the reason why I'm asking is I want to come to another question. There's a lot of students here and following online that are interested in literature, maybe more than in the Nobel. And what would you say we can learn from Annie Arnault for those that are interested in literature or interested in being authors themselves or are writing and want to get better? What is it in her approach, in her work, in her writing that you think is worthy of teaching others that are aspiring writers or aspiring to understand literature? Is it the flat writing? It seems her own, you said she doesn't write in sentences. That seems challenging. Not to write, perhaps, but to make sense of.
She does write in sentences, but not very long ones. It's
Right.
not post.
No, I understand. Yeah. So is it the acuity in her writing, which seems almost like poetical, since the books are short and she wants to be very brief, but also to be brief means that you need to be very clear in what you want to convey. So you need to take away, like a blade, cut off everything that is not necessary to be there. Is that the thing? Is it the technique that is worthy of copying to understand it better, for instance?
I think if students here want to write, they have to find their own way. They certainly can't reproduce Annie Ernaux's way. I mean, I don't know.
우연히도
So coincidentally, in this semester, in one of my class, I am reading the classics of Ernaux. That was by coincidence, and the objective that was presented by the school was to enhance the French language skills of the students. But in that respect, Ernaux's language is very easily translated, actually, and that means she has a lot of room left, empty spaces in her sentences. And so we discuss how we can fill that empty space left by the author. And that's what makes this class so interesting, because we can have these fruitful discussions. And while talking to my students, I myself learn new things. So it's a very good text to share with students.
Speak about translation, because I realized when I read the translation of Laplace that there was a double entendre in the title, because of course it could be the square, but it's also a man's place, as it says. So it's very good translation in English.
I think it's good choice. It was good choice. Man's place.
Yes, I think so.
저는 개인적으로 동의하지 않습니다.
I don't agree with your opinion. Yes, I don't think it was a good choice for a title.
Limited
masculine.
the meaning. 그 원제목은
The original title is Laplace, and la is a definitive. It's a da. But in French language, la refers to not only the place, but at the same time, it is actually a prefix that describes, the general place. So it refers to the place that the father was. However, the place that had been occupied by the father was part of a universal place that could have been occupied by other people. And so if you put in the word men's place, then that would narrow down the meaning of that place too much. In the same context, the Win Femme is a story about her mother, and Win refers to awe in the English language, an un. So awe or un refers to a noun that is not designated. So when she's talking about her mother, she's referring to her mother as an undefined woman. So in the position of her mother, there is room for the readers to put in other figures in their own life who could take that place. So in the Korean translation, the title that was given to the work was not a good choice.
Okay, there is room for improvement, apparently. Well, I want to thank you very much, all three of you, for coming and for sharing your knowledge about Annie Ernaux and improving our knowledge and understanding of her. And I just want to say, well, thank you. This is the end of the literature session.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. A big applause. Thank you. And before closing, or as we're closing, I would first like to call back up to the stage Professor Katrin Wiklund, Provice Chancellor of Umeå University, to give a few closing words.
네, 마무리 인사를 해주시겠습니다.
Thank you so much. I hope you all get curious of the literature by the Nobel laureate Annie Ernaux. I did, and I hope I did it for the right reasons. I may reflect that we have met different ways to describe humans today, We started off with the Nobel Prize in Medicine awarded to Professor Pääbo for his discoveries concerning the genomes of extinct hominids and human evolution and how that defines us as humans. And we end the day with the Nobel Prize in Literature to Nord and how collective experiences is shared in her writing and how her writing express her and how you interpret her personality and experiences during the discussion. There are definitely different ways to understand us humans. I would also like to give a large thank you to Florence Cisak, Shorong Kang and Woo Sung Kang for your valuable presentations and for sharing your very inspiring discussion with us tonight. And I would also like to take the opportunity to thank Anders Hector, the Science and Innovation Counselor at the Embassy of Sweden here in Seoul, who have done a tremendous job both before and during today. He has been the moderator for all sessions. And a great thank you for the audience, both here and in the air, for being here this night, sharing this very important moment for this literature prize. So this was the very last part of the first on-site Nobel Memorial Program, and it's now really time to close the session. I hope to see you again next year about the same time. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.